Sometimes the smallest act of kindness arrives on the very day you feel you have nothing left to give. Emily Turner stared at the warning notice in her hands and felt her chest tighten. The letter was brief, professional, and impossible to ignore. If she failed to make the overdue payment within 10 days, her car could be repossessed. She read the notice twice before setting it down on the kitchen counter of her small apartment. For a moment, she simply stood there in silence. The car was not a luxury. It was not a symbol of status. It was the one thing holding her life together. Without it, getting to work would become nearly impossible. Taking her 8-year-old daughter Ava to school every morning would become a daily struggle. Emily closed her eyes and took a slow breath. At 33 years old, she had become an expert at carrying worry without letting it show. She worked as a part-time office assistant, stretched every paycheck as far as possible, and spent countless nights calculating bills at the kitchen table after Ava fell asleep. Somehow, despite all her effort, there was never quite enough. Across the room, Ava sat on the couch reading a library book. Her blonde hair fell across her shoulders as she turned each page with complete concentration. Watching her daughter always reminded Emily why she kept going. No matter how difficult life became, Ava deserved stability, hope, and every opportunity Emily could provide. "Mom," Ava asked suddenly. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you okay?" Emily smiled immediately. "Of course." Ava studied her for a moment. "You look worried." Children noticed more than adults realized. Emily walked over and sat beside her daughter. "Just thinking about work." Ava nodded. "You always figure things out." The simple confidence in her daughter's voice touched her heart. If only she felt as certain as Ava did. The following days passed in a blur of responsibilities. Emily picked up extra hours whenever possible and searched online for additional work opportunities. Every solution seemed temporary. Every option felt uncertain. Then came Thursday evening. Rain clouds covered the sky as she left work and began driving home through steady traffic. The windshield wipers moved back and forth while headlights reflected across the wet pavement. Emily felt exhausted. It had been one of the longest weeks she could remember. She was less than 15 minutes from home when she noticed something unusual ahead. Near the shoulder of a quiet road, a dark vehicle sat with its hazard lights flashing. At first she drove past without thinking. Then she noticed a man standing beside the vehicle in the rain. He appeared to be having difficulty walking comfortably. Emily continued another 100 yards before her conscience interrupted her thoughts. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Most drivers were passing without stopping. Her first instinct was to keep going. She had problems of her own. She needed to get home. She needed to focus on Ava, bills, and the 1,000 worries already filling her mind. Yet something about the situation stayed with her. After a few seconds, she made a decision. Emily carefully turned the car around and headed back toward the stranded vehicle. As rain tapped softly against the windshield, she pulled onto the shoulder and parked nearby. She had no idea that the choice she was about to make would change the course of her life forever. She had no idea that the choice she was about to make would change the course of her life forever. Emily Turner stepped out of her car and pulled her jacket tighter against the cold rain. Water dripped from the edge of her hood as she approached the stranded vehicle. The man standing beside it looked to be in his early 40s. His clothes were damp from the weather, and he appeared uncomfortable as he leaned lightly against the side of the car. "Are you okay?" Emily called out. The man looked surprised that someone had stopped. "I think so," he replied with a grateful smile. "I twisted my ankle trying to check something near the tire. It is not serious, but driving is probably not the best idea right now." Emily glanced at the vehicle. It was clean and well-maintained, but otherwise unremarkable. Nothing about the man suggested extraordinary wealth or importance. He looked like any other professional caught in an unfortunate situation. "Do you need medical help?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I just need a little time." Emily hesitated. Every responsible voice in her head reminded her that she needed to get home. Ava was waiting. Dinner still needed to be prepared. Bills still needed to be solved. Yet she could not bring herself to leave. "There is a small urgent care clinic about 10 minutes from here," she said. "I could drive you." The man seemed reluctant. "I could call someone." "In this weather?" Emily asked. "You might be waiting a long time." After a brief pause, he nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate that." A few minutes later, they were driving through the rain together. The stranger introduced himself as Daniel Hayes. Emily told him her name, and explained that she lived nearby with her daughter. The conversation remained simple and comfortable. Daniel asked about Ava, and Emily found herself talking about her daughter's love of reading and science projects. Daniel listened with genuine interest. Unlike many people, he did not seem distracted or eager to talk about himself. After arriving at the clinic, Daniel checked in while Emily waited in the lobby. She considered leaving immediately, but something told her to stay until he knew whether the injury was serious. About 40 minutes later, Daniel returned. "Good news," he said. "Just a minor sprain." Emily smiled with relief. "That is good." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "Most people would have kept driving." Emily shrugged. "I almost did." He laughed softly. "I am glad you did not." Outside, the rain had begun to ease. Daniel arranged transportation to retrieve his vehicle the next day and prepared to leave. Before getting into a rideshare car, he turned back toward Emily. "Thank you again," he said sincerely. "You helped a complete stranger." Emily smiled. "I hope someone would do the same for me." Daniel nodded as though the answer meant more than she realized. Then he handed her a small card with his phone number. "If I can ever return the favor, please call." Emily accepted it politely, expecting she would probably never use it. She drove home thinking little more about the encounter. By the time she walked through her apartment door and saw Ava waiting with a smile, her attention returned to everyday life. She did not know that Daniel was thinking about her kindness long after that rainy evening ended, or that he was already looking for a way to thank the woman who had helped him when she had every reason to keep driving. She did not know that Daniel was thinking about her kindness long after that rainy evening ended, or that he was already looking for a way to thank the woman who had helped him when she had every reason to keep driving. Life returned to its normal rhythm during the following week. Emily Turner focused on work, bills, and caring for Ava. The warning notice about her car remained tucked inside a drawer, but it occupied her thoughts far more often than she wanted to admit. She continued searching for extra opportunities and trying to stretch every dollar as far as possible. Some evenings, she felt hopeful. Other evenings, she wondered how much longer she could keep everything together. One Saturday morning, Emily and Ava visited a neighborhood community fair held at a local park. The event offered free activities for families, small business booths, and children's programs. Ava loved those kinds of gatherings. She spent most of the morning moving excitedly from one activity to another while Emily followed with a smile. For a few hours, it felt good to focus on something other than financial worries. As they approached a booth offering free books for children, Emily heard a familiar voice behind her. "I was beginning to think I would never see you again." She turned and immediately recognized Daniel Hayes. He looked completely different from the rainy evening they had met. His ankle appeared much better, and he seemed relaxed and comfortable. Ava looked curiously between them. "Mom, who is that?" Emily smiled. "This is Daniel. We met last week." Daniel crouched slightly to greet Ava at eye level. "I have heard good things about you." Ava smiled shyly. "Really?" "Absolutely," Daniel replied. "Especially about your love of books." Within moments, the three were talking comfortably. Daniel seemed genuinely interested in everything Ava had to say. He listened as she described her favorite stories and recent school projects. Emily found herself surprised by how naturally the conversation flowed. There was no awkwardness and no sense that Daniel felt obligated to continue the acquaintance. It felt as though he genuinely enjoyed being there. After some time, Daniel looked toward Emily. "I never properly thanked you." Emily laughed softly. "You thanked me several times." "Not enough." He paused before continuing. "Would you allow me to buy lunch for you and Ava?" Emily instinctively hesitated. Accepting help had never been easy for her. Daniel seemed to notice her uncertainty. "No obligations," he added. "Just lunch." Ava looked up hopefully. Emily could not help smiling. "All right." They spent the next hour at a small cafe near the park. The conversation remained easy and enjoyable. Daniel shared stories about traveling for work, though he remained surprisingly vague about what he actually did. Whenever Emily asked questions about his career, he answered politely without offering many details. Instead, he seemed far more interested in learning about her life. By the end of the meal, Emily realized she had laughed more than she had in weeks. As they prepared to leave, Daniel handed Ava a book he had quietly purchased from one of the fair vendors. "For your next reading adventure," he said. Ava's face lit up with excitement. "Thank you." Watching the exchange warmed Emily's heart. As she drove home later that afternoon, She found herself thinking about Daniel more than she expected. There was something unusual about him, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not say. Beneath his easy smile and quiet kindness, she sensed there was much more to his story than he was willing to reveal. There was something unusual about him, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not say. Beneath his easy smile and quiet kindness, she sensed there was much more to his story than he was willing to reveal. Over the following weeks, Daniel Hayes gradually became a familiar part of Emily Turner's life. It happened naturally, without either of them planning it. Sometimes he would call to ask how Ava's latest school project was progressing. Other times he would recommend a book after learning that both Emily and Ava enjoyed reading. Their conversations were never forced. They simply seemed to enjoy talking to one another. For Emily, that alone felt unusual. Life had been focused on responsibility for so long that friendship had rarely been a priority. Between work, parenting, and financial stress, there was little energy left for anything else. Yet Daniel somehow fit into their lives without creating pressure or complications. One Saturday morning, Ava participated in a community science fair at the local recreation center. Emily spent most of the week helping her prepare a presentation about renewable energy. Ava had worked hard and could barely contain her excitement. When they arrived at the event, Emily was surprised to see Daniel standing near the entrance. "What are you doing here?" she asked with a laugh. Daniel smiled. "I was invited by a very enthusiastic young scientist." Ava proudly raised her hand. "That was me." Daniel laughed. "And I could not say no." Throughout the event, Daniel listened attentively as Ava explained her project to judges and visitors. His encouragement seemed genuine, and Ava responded to it immediately. Emily noticed how comfortable her daughter felt around him. That realization brought both comfort and caution. As a mother, she protected Ava carefully. Trust was not something she gave away easily. Yet Daniel consistently showed patience, kindness, and respect. Later that afternoon, after the event ended, the three stopped for ice cream. They sat outside beneath clear blue skies, while Ava excitedly talked about future inventions she hoped to create someday. Daniel listened as though every word mattered. Watching them together brought an unfamiliar warmth to Emily's heart. For years, most of her energy had been spent surviving. She had not allowed herself to imagine what a fuller life might look like. As the weeks passed, their friendship continued growing. Daniel occasionally helped with small things, but never in ways that felt uncomfortable. When Emily mentioned struggling to understand a computer software program at work, he recommended an online course. When Ava needed suggestions for books, he always seemed to know exactly what she might enjoy. He never offered money. He never tried to solve Emily's problems. Instead, he offered support, encouragement, and his time. One evening, while walking home from Margaret Ellis's apartment after checking on her elderly neighbor, Emily noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Two professionally dressed individuals briefly spoke with Daniel before handing him several documents. The interaction lasted less than a minute. By the time Daniel noticed Emily approaching, the car had already driven away. "Friends of yours?" Emily asked casually. Daniel smiled. "Something like that." The answer was polite but vague. Emily laughed. "You always answer questions without actually answering them." Daniel looked amused. "Do I?" "Absolutely." For a moment, their eyes met. Then Daniel smiled and changed the subject. Emily let it go, but curiosity lingered. Small moments like that had become increasingly common. Expensive watches he rarely wore. Phone calls he stepped away to take. People who seemed unusually eager to speak with him. None of it made sense. Yet despite the mystery, one thing remained clear. Every time Daniel appeared, life seemed a little brighter. What Emily did not realize was that the truth behind those unanswered questions was far bigger than anything she had imagined. What Emily did not realize was that the truth behind those unanswered questions was far bigger than anything she had imagined. As winter slowly approached, Daniel Hayes became one of the people Emily Turner trusted most. Their friendship had developed gradually, built through dozens of ordinary moments rather than dramatic events. They talked about books, family, work, and life. They shared stories about childhood memories and future dreams. Most importantly, they listened to one another. For Emily, that kind of connection had become rare. One evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Emily sat at her kitchen table reviewing bills when her phone rang. It was Daniel. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Emily laughed softly. Only my weekly battle with numbers. Who is winning? Definitely not me. Daniel chuckled. Then I think you deserve a break. They spent nearly an hour talking. By the time the call ended, Emily felt noticeably lighter. Daniel had a way of making difficult days seem manageable. He never pretended to have all the answers. He simply made people feel understood. Meanwhile, Ava had become one of Daniel's biggest fans. Whenever his name came up, her face immediately brightened. She often asked whether he would be joining them for community events or weekend activities. Daniel always treated her with patience and respect, never speaking down to her despite the difference in age. One Saturday, the three attended a holiday market downtown. The streets were decorated with lights, local musicians performed seasonal songs, and families filled the sidewalks. While browsing vendor booths, Emily noticed something unusual again. Several people appeared to recognize Daniel. Some greeted him warmly. Others seemed surprised to see him. One man even shook his hand with unusual enthusiasm and thanked him for something Emily could not hear. When the man walked away, Emily raised an eyebrow. You seem popular. Daniel smiled. Not really. That is not what it looked like. He laughed and gently changed the subject once again. The pattern had become familiar. Every time a conversation approached personal details about his career or background, Daniel redirected attention elsewhere. Emily found it intriguing, but never pushed too hard. She respected boundaries because she understood what it felt like to guard certain parts of your life. Still, curiosity continued growing. A few days later, another unusual moment occurred. Emily stopped by a coffee shop before work and noticed a business magazine sitting on a nearby table. She absent-mindedly flipped through several pages while waiting for her order. One article featured a successful technology company that had recently expanded into multiple states. A photograph accompanied the story, but before she could examine it closely, her order was called and she set the magazine aside. She never noticed that the man featured in the article looked remarkably familiar. That same evening, Daniel joined Emily and Ava for dinner at a small family restaurant. The conversation was easy and relaxed. At one point, Ava excused herself to visit the dessert display near the front of the restaurant. As soon as she left, Emily looked at Daniel and smiled. Can I ask you something? You can ask. What are you not telling me? Daniel laughed. That is a very broad question. I am serious. She smiled playfully. There is clearly more to your story than you admit. For the first time, Daniel became noticeably thoughtful. Maybe there is. Emily waited. After a moment, he added, but I like that you got to know me before any of that mattered. The answer surprised her. Before she could ask another question, Ava returned to the table carrying a menu full of dessert options. The conversation shifted, but Daniel's words stayed in Emily's mind. She had a feeling she was standing very close to a truth she still could not see. And sooner than either of them expected, that truth was about to change everything. And sooner than either of them expected, that truth was about to change everything. The revelation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Emily Turner was taking a short break at work when one of her co-workers rushed into the office carrying a business magazine. You have to see this, the woman said excitedly while pointing at the cover. Emily glanced down casually at first. Then she froze. Staring back at her from the front page was Daniel Hayes. The same Daniel who had shared coffee with her, attended community events with Ava, and spent months acting like an ordinary man. Beneath his photograph appeared a headline celebrating the continued success of Hayes Innovations, a technology company valued at billions of dollars. Emily blinked several times, convinced she had misunderstood what she was seeing. She took the magazine and began reading. The article described Daniel as one of the most influential business leaders in the country. It mentioned major investments, charitable foundations, national recognition, and a corporate empire that stretched across multiple states. The more she read, the more unbelievable it felt. Her mind immediately replayed dozens of conversations. The mysterious phone calls. The people who recognized him. The expensive watch he rarely wore. Suddenly everything made sense. Yet instead of feeling impressed, Emily felt hurt. Not because Daniel was successful, but because he had never told her the truth. That evening, Daniel called as usual. Emily answered, but her tone was noticeably different. Is everything okay? He asked. I read an article today, she replied quietly. A brief silence followed. Daniel immediately understood. I see. You could have told me. His voice remained calm. I know. Why did you not? Emily asked. Because I wanted the chance to be known as Daniel before being known as everything else. She wanted to argue, but part of her understood exactly what he meant. Daniel continued. Most people change when they learn who I am. Conversations become different. Expectations become different. Sometimes friendships disappear entirely. Emily sat silently at her kitchen table. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. You are right, Daniel said. I should have. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to stay angry. A few days later, they agreed to meet at a quiet park. Winter sunlight filtered through the trees as they walked along a paved path. Daniel spoke honestly about his life for the first time. He explained how years of building his company had brought success, but also isolation. He described the pressure of constant attention and how difficult it had become to know who genuinely cared about him. The night you stopped in the rain, he said, you had no idea who I was. Emily nodded. Of course not. That is exactly why it mattered so much. They stopped walking. Daniel looked at her with complete honesty. You helped because someone needed help, not because you expected anything in return. Emily felt her frustration slowly fading. She realized that the man standing beside her was the same person she had known for months. His wealth changed facts, but it did not change his character. Still, the discovery created a new reality between them. The distance separating their worlds suddenly felt much larger than before. And as Emily looked ahead, she could not help wondering whether two people from such different lives could truly find a future together. And as Emily looked ahead, she could not help wondering whether two people from such different lives could truly find a future together. The days that followed felt different. Nothing had changed on the surface, yet everything seemed more complicated. Emily Turner still went to work each morning, helped Ava with homework each evening, and managed the endless responsibilities that came with being a single mother. But now every time she spoke with Daniel Hayes, she was aware of a reality she had never seen before. The man she had come to trust was not simply successful. He lived in a world of private meetings, national headlines, and opportunities beyond anything she had ever experienced. One afternoon, while waiting to pick Ava up from school, Emily found herself staring at a news article about Daniel's company on her phone. The numbers alone seemed impossible to imagine. Entire departments, thousands of employees, offices across the country. She suddenly felt very small. When Daniel called later that evening, their conversation was polite, but noticeably more reserved. He sensed it immediately. You seem distant, he said gently. Emily hesitated before answering. I am trying to understand where I fit into all of this. All of what? Daniel asked. Your life. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Emily, he finally said, nothing about my life changes how I feel when I talk to you. Maybe not for you. What does that mean? Emily sighed. You can walk into any room, and people know who you are. I spend my days worrying about grocery prices and car payments. Daniel listened carefully. Do you really think those things determine a person's worth? No, she admitted. But they create very different realities. The conversation ended kindly, but neither felt completely satisfied. For the first time since they had met, uncertainty stood between them. Meanwhile, Ava noticed the change almost immediately. One evening while helping set the table, she looked up at her mother. Did you and Daniel have an argument? Emily laughed softly. No. Then why do you look sad whenever his name comes up? Children often saw truths adults try to hide. Emily sat beside her daughter and smiled. Sometimes grown-ups need time to think. Ava considered that answer. I think he cares about you. The simple observation caught Emily off guard. Before she could respond, Ava added, and I think you care about him too. Later that weekend, Daniel invited Emily and Ava to attend a charity event supporting local education programs. Emily almost declined. The idea of stepping into Daniel's world felt intimidating. But after several days of reflection, she realized avoiding him would not solve anything. The event turned out to be far less intimidating than she expected. Daniel spent most of the evening speaking with teachers, volunteers, and families. He treated everyone with the same kindness he had always shown her. Watching him interact with people reminded Emily of something important. Before she knew about the company, before she knew about the wealth, she had admired the man himself. As the evening ended, Daniel walked beside her toward the parking lot. I know this has been difficult, he said quietly. Emily nodded. A little. Then let me ask you one question. She looked at him. What question? Daniel smiled gently. If you had never learned how much money I have, Would anything between us feel different today? Emily opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. If she had never learned how much money Daniel Hayes possessed, nothing between them would have felt different. The realization stayed with Emily Turner long after she returned home that night. As she sat quietly at her kitchen table after Ava had gone to bed, she replayed every meaningful moment they had shared. She thought about the rainy evening when she first stopped to help a stranger. She remembered community events, conversations over coffee, and the countless times Daniel had offered encouragement when she needed it most. None of those memories had anything to do with money. They were about kindness, trust, and genuine connection. For the first time since learning Daniel's secret, Emily began to see the situation more clearly. The problem was not who Daniel was. The problem was her fear. She worried about fitting into a world she did not understand. She worried about being judged. Most of all, she worried that their differences would eventually create obstacles neither of them could overcome. Yet every time she examined those fears honestly, she arrived at the same conclusion. Daniel had never treated her as though she were less important than anyone else. In fact, he often treated her with more respect than people she had known for years. Several days later, Emily received unexpected news at work. Her supervisor informed her that she would be considered for a full-time position opening within the company. The role offered better pay, benefits, and opportunities for advancement. It was not guaranteed, but it represented real progress. Emily left the meeting feeling hopeful. The timing felt significant. For months, she had focused on surviving. Now she was finally beginning to build something stable. That evening she called Daniel. "I have good news," she said. His excitement was immediate. "Tell me." After explaining the opportunity, she heard genuine pride in his voice. "Emily, that is wonderful. Nothing is official yet." "Maybe not," Daniel replied. "But you earned this." The simple statement meant more than he realized. Daniel never acted as though success should simply appear because of their connection. He believed in her abilities and wanted her to succeed on her own terms. That understanding helped dissolve another layer of uncertainty. A week later, Daniel invited Emily to walk through a botanical garden that had recently opened for the spring season. Bright flowers lined the pathways, and families wandered peacefully through the exhibits. As they walked together, conversation came easily. For the first time in weeks, neither seemed guarded. Eventually, they found a quiet bench overlooking a small pond. Daniel looked out across the water before speaking. "Can I tell you something honestly?" Emily smiled. "I hope so." He laughed softly. Then his expression became serious. "Meeting you changed me." Emily felt her heart quicken. Daniel continued. "For years, I focused almost entirely on work. I convinced myself that achievement was enough. Then one rainy evening, someone stopped to help a stranger without expecting anything in return." Emily looked down, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "Daniel, let me finish." He smiled gently. "You reminded me what matters." For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Emily met his eyes. "You changed me too." The admission felt natural because it was true. Every fear that had stood between them seemed smaller now. The future remained uncertain. Challenges still existed. Yet something important had changed. They were no longer deciding whether their worlds could fit together. They were beginning to imagine what life might look like if they chose to build a future side by side. They were no longer deciding whether their worlds could fit together. They were beginning to imagine what life might look like if they chose to build a future side by side. The months that followed brought changes neither Emily Turner nor Daniel Hayes could have predicted on the rainy evening when their paths first crossed. Emily was offered the full-time position she had hoped for. The promotion brought financial stability, health benefits, and a renewed sense of confidence. For the first time in years, she no longer felt trapped by constant uncertainty. The overdue bills disappeared one by one. The warning notice that had once threatened her transportation became nothing more than a distant memory. Yet the greatest changes were not financial. They were personal. Emily had spent so much of her life focused on survival that she had forgotten what it felt like to plan for happiness. Now she found herself doing exactly that. Daniel remained a steady presence throughout every step of her journey. Despite his success, he never tried to take control of her life or solve every challenge for her. Instead, he celebrated her achievements and encouraged her independence. That balance only strengthened the trust between them. Ava noticed it too. One evening while the three shared dinner together, she smiled and said, "You both laugh a lot more than you used to." Emily and Daniel exchanged amused glances. The observation was impossible to deny. Life felt lighter. A year after their first meeting, a community education center hosted a celebration recognizing local volunteers and organizations that had contributed to neighborhood development programs. Daniel had quietly supported the center for years through grants and resources, while Emily had recently begun volunteering there on weekends. Families, teachers, community leaders, and children gathered together for the event. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. As the program continued, one of the organizers invited Emily to speak about her experience. Standing before the audience, she looked out across the room. She saw Ava sitting proudly in the front row. Beside her sat Daniel, smiling with quiet encouragement. Emily took a breath and began. "A little over a year ago, I believed my life was moving in the wrong direction. I was overwhelmed, exhausted, and worried about how I would provide for my daughter." The room grew silent. Then something unexpected happened. A simple decision led me to people who changed my perspective. I learned that help sometimes arrives in forms we do not expect. More importantly, I learned that kindness has a way of creating opportunities we cannot see yet. Several audience members nodded. Emily smiled. "What changed my life was not money. It was connection. It was community. It was meeting people who believed in me before I fully believed in myself." Applause filled the room as she concluded. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, Emily, Ava, and Daniel walked outside together beneath a sky filled with early summer stars. The evening air felt warm and peaceful. They paused near the entrance of the building and looked back at the crowd slowly leaving the event. "Do you ever think about that night in the rain?" Daniel asked. Emily laughed softly. "Sometimes." "Me too." Ava looked between them.